Hi, my name is Laura Burgoyne, and I'm excited to be joining together with my sister Connie Blackwood in the NOSA Unleashed podcast. Here, we want to expose the stigma surrounding mental health issues by illuminating and discussing real life challenges and obstacles, keeping us paralyzed and fearful to move forward. Let us inspire you to believe there's more to life than what you're currently experiencing. You can rise from your despair and find hope for the future. It's time to end the silence, remove the stigma of mental health, and to pursue the path to purpose and fulfillment. We will do this together because no one stands alone. Welcome back to the NOSA Unleashed podcast. I'm Laura Burgoyne, and on today's podcast, we're going to be talking about benchmarks. What are they? Why are they important? And how does acknowledging them in our life help us to progress quickly and move forward with momentum? And welcome, Connie, to this conversation. I'm so happy to have this conversation with you.
Thanks for having me today. It's great to be here.
To start us off, I just want to talk about what a benchmark is defined as. And in the online dictionary, it says it's a standard or point of reference against which things may be compared or assessed. So, Connie, what does that what does benchmarks mean to you? Have you seen it apply to your life, or how have you used them to your benefit?
So the way I look at it is kind of like a goal in some ways. So like when I achieve that goal, then I've reached that benchmark. So like I guess if I was to look at it in progression of life, I would look at it as a graduation in some ways because you hit a benchmark when you finish grade 6. Well, now they've made it 5 in some schools and go into junior high, right? And then same when you go into high school, it's a new benchmark, right? When you graduate high school, new benchmark. When you graduate college, new benchmark. So educationally wise, those would be obvious benchmarks for us. But I believe that we do the same things in our lives. Like when we set a goal for ourselves, then when we achieve that goal, we've set a new benchmark. And, it can go even deeper than that. I think when we get to any new level in our life, it can be considered a benchmark because that's a new starting point. That's a new taking off point for us, right? And so that's the way I view it anyway.
Yeah, I like that. I kind of see it as you know, kind of markers of growth,
Mm-hmm.
right? Your examples that you used is great, but I also think it applies in every area of our life, right? It applies in, areas that we want to grow personally, maybe areas of struggle, areas that we've really had trauma in or really felt like blocked in, right? We can have
Mm-hmm.
areas of growth where once we overcome something or once we learn something, then there becomes a benchmark in our life, and that, like you said, it's a new starting point. It's like almost like a new firm foundation of where we can grow from there, right? And when I
Well,
was
if
thinking about this, oh, go ahead.
well, I find it interesting that you said progress or like growth because in Philippians 3:16 it says, "But we must hold on to the progress we've already made." And that's basically what you're saying at, right? Getting at is that we need to hold on to that progress once we've made it.
Right. And I know some people that I've talked to, they might have a perception of, well, I haven't grown, right? I haven't had many successes in my life, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
think if we just even look at it from a perspective of like just life skills, even, right? Of course we've grown, right? When I was younger, like I was still in diapers. Have I been potty trained? Of course, right? Like as an infant, I couldn't walk. Here I can run miles or, so even when we think of it on a personal level, like we have many major milestones in our life. We have major um, benchmarks in our life, and how easy it is to just, once we get to a certain level, even forget where we've come from,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think even when we don't recognize the fact that these benchmarks exist and also understand the reason why they're important and how we can use them for our benefit, I think they can actually, hinder us in some ways. And I I wanted to talk about some of the ways that I guess I call them enemies of growth, right? When we talk about benchmarks, like there's some there's some very significant obstacles that we'll face when dealing with trying to use these benchmarks for our benefit. And one of them is comparison. And I'm going to use a story from my life just as an example. Um, in a lot of areas of my life, I used to compare myself to others. And every time I did that, I always felt like I fell short. I felt like I could never be good enough. And so I was in my like early adulthood, and I kind of shifted that thinking from being that I would compare myself to others to I'm going to compare myself with myself. And I can remember distinctly, I was 18 years old. I got a job at a hotel as like a roommate. And, you know, there's all sorts of us working there, and we all work at different speeds and we all have different skill set. And I made it my mission to not compare myself with anyone else because we had a quota. Like we were supposed to clean a certain amount of rooms in a certain amount of time. And if we didn't do that, like we weren't meeting our quota. And that was fine and everything, but I didn't necessarily wanted to just have that standard. Like I will always want to better myself, right? And so I had this mindset, well, if the room took me 45 minutes, then the next day I was going to try to beat my time. Right? I wanted to always be growing and improving my skill and getting better. And so instead of comparing myself with other people who are doing the same job and feeling like maybe I wasn't measuring up or I wasn't doing a good enough job, I started using myself as my own benchmark. Right? My success of last week or the month before, that was my benchmark, right? So, for example, when I had to come to work and I had to get all these rooms cleaned for the new guests coming in. When I reached 30 minutes for a room, that was my new benchmark, right? And so I just continually um, try to just grow and develop myself. And I know this is a pretty simple example, but I also like I communicate this to my kids all the time because I have 5 teenage boys at home, and so we have conversations about these kind of things all the time. And I try to encourage them, don't compare yourself to other kids. Don't compare yourself to your friends or even your siblings. You are your own person, and you're going to grow, you're going to heal, you're going to develop at your own pace. But the most important thing is that you recognize where you are, where you want to be, and the progress that you're making towards that. And I think it's so important that we don't compare ourselves with anyone else. And Connie, I know that you have an opinion on this topic about comparison. So I'm just going to open the floor that you can share your heart.
Well, I think there's two sides to like comparing because you can go one of two ways. You can either compare yourself to people who are lesser than you, and then you then struggle with pride and ego in a way, and to the point where you're like, oh, I don't need to grow. I'm good where I'm at because look at all these people who can't even come close to where I'm at. And so then you get into this point where you think you're arrived and you don't continue to grow, and that's not healthy because we all need to grow. And then you have the
Right.
other side of the coin, and that's this side that I think you were talking about, and that's the side that I struggle with the most, is not being good enough and not being able to measure up to the people around you because they're so much further ahead or so much beyond where you are that you're like, oh, I can never catch up. I can never be enough. I can never do enough to even be in the same arena as these people. And for me, I think that's the one I struggle with the most because, I tend to follow people who are stronger in areas that I want to improve in. And sometimes that like little whisper comes in that, oh, you'll never measure up. Well, I'm not supposed to be them. I'm supposed to be me. And I can use their tools and I can use their strategies to further myself, but I'm going to have different results because I'm not the same person. And I
Right.
have to recognize that. And so for me, I think when it comes to comparison, it's once again going and sure, use somebody else's tools if it can help you propel you forward, but you need to compare your own progress with yourself, just like Laura was saying. It's you look back to where you have been. And so when I look back to where I was 2 years ago, there's no way I'd be doing a podcast 2 years ago. There's no
Right.
way. But I've grown so much in the last 2 years that here I am, obviously with you joining me because I haven't done any solos. But I'm just saying, like, that's huge growth for me. And
Yeah.
so, even in that aspect, I'm way different than I was 2 years ago. But if I don't look back and go, I'm doing better because I can do all of these new things, or I've reached these goals, or I've reached these milestones or benchmarks, or whatever you want to view them as, there's still levels in your life where you're progressing and you're growing and you're moving yourself forward. And you're not staying stuck in that one place. And there's other
Absolutely.
things that are enemies as well, but I'm sure Laura has a few ideas on those.
Well, on this one, I just wanted to also bring up the fact about sometimes we have unrealistic expectations of ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, for example, if I have a goal, my expectation of myself, might be, on our benchmark scale, might be 10 benchmarks ahead of where I am,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so we actually sometimes set ourselves up for failure when we think that we have to achieve something that's so far beyond where we're at. And I think we have to sometimes realize that we just need to go to the next benchmark. So where am I now? Like recognizing where am I right now? And of course we want to go somewhere. We're on a journey. We're going somewhere. But we can't get there right away. Like it's little steps along the way, mini victories along the way, right? And every time we solidify one of those things, we create a new benchmark, right? And so I think it's important that we don't look too far ahead, right? That we can look at, well, what's next? What's our next step?
Well, and I think that's true even in driving, because like if you're trying to look a mile ahead, you're going to miss the stuff right in front of you and you're going to hit something, right? Like you need to be focused on what's right in front of you, what's right ahead of you. Otherwise,
Mhm.
you're going to have issues because you can't be focused on something that's so far down the road. It's going to do a lot of damage in its wake. And I just like I can talk from experience on this because I've been dealing with this lately. Like I'm trying to create a course. And I did the first module and it was daunting to even get that done because my mind was so focused on I have to get this whole course done and I'm just barely touching the surface. And it's true, like it's a 6 module course and there's videos and all sorts of things that need to go into it, but each thing is one step. So as I write each module, that's one step. As I do the videos, that's one step. As I edit it, that's one step. And if I take it as one step at a time, then each time I hit a benchmark, it's going to motivate me to go forward. Once I finished the first module, I was excited to jump into module 2. It wasn't hard anymore. And I think just focusing on getting even one of those benchmarks out of the way will help propel you forward.
Absolutely. So I think one major thing to highlight in all of what we were just talking about is the warning, don't try to do what you're doing the same way as someone else. You are someone completely different. You have different life experience, you have different, maybe even life goals, and the way that you're going to achieve those things are going to be different. And so if we can say anything about this one topic, the first part here is don't compare yourself to anyone else. Your journey is your own, and you don't want to fall into those those traps of the pride or the ego, or even the lack of self-esteem where you just feel like you never measure up. Another enemy of growth, Connie, and I know this one is a huge one, but it's fear, absolute
Mm-hmm.
fear. And that could be fear of moving forward because we don't know what comes next. We don't know what's going to be required of us, but also I was thinking about this. There's also a fear of moving backwards, right? And some of the people I've talked to, that's a significant fear. Well, I've overcome this, but what if I go back into that addiction? What if I go back into that abusive relationship? What if I fall back into that negative habit, right? And when we've hit a milestone, when we've hit a benchmark, if we go backwards, it's because we're making a conscious choice to do so. Because the very nature of a benchmark, like we are now on a new solid footing, we're now on a new solid ground, right? We have a new place to catapult us into future decisions from. We're no longer in that vulnerable or broken place because we've overcome that. And so when we recognize that fact, you can overcome that fear of going backwards. If you recognize where you're at, where you've come from. And I love there's a scripture about, to continually be moving forward. Don't focus on the past. Don't be looking back in regards to, when you're trying to be moving forward, like don't have your focus being on the past, on where you have to reflect there from time to time. But when you're in forward movement, you got to be looking forward. You can't be looking backwards. And so when you are in that place and you are fearful that you're going to be moving backwards, I just want to say to you, well, if you do, you're actually making a conscious choice to do so.
And I think the verse you're talking about is Philippians 3, verses 13 and 14. No, dear brothers and sisters, I have not achieved it, but I focus on this one thing, forgetting the past and looking forward to what lies ahead. I press on to reach the end of the race and receive the heavenly prize for which God, through Christ, is calling us. Let all who are spiritually mature agree on these things. And then it goes on. But, I think you're right. I think sometimes we get so stuck in looking back that you go in the direction you're looking, right?
Right.
So if you're so focused on where you've come from, you're not going to move forward because you're not looking there. It's the same with your driving. When you drive, if you're not looking at the road, you tend to steer into the direction you're looking. So the looky-loos, if you have watched them, they tend to steer into the direction that they're actually looking at. And that's why they tend to slow down, because they know it's dangerous to do that at high speed. And it's interesting because it's so true in our lives as well as driving, right? That where we look is where we go. So if you're so focused on the past and so overwhelmed by the past, it's very hard to move forward and to keep going and to keep your momentum. But I like the idea of reflecting because you can see where you've come from, but it's just a glance. Like if you glance in your mirrors, you don't veer off. It's when you're looking backwards that you can veer off track.
Absolutely. The other side of that coin too, Connie, is of fear is we fear of not growing. We fear of, what's going to keep us moving forward. We have a fear that keeps us from trying, right?
Well,
We almost get
because
comfortable and complacent where we are, right?
because it holds us to a higher standard. Because once we've learned something, you can't unlearn it. Once you've reached that new height, you can't, you choose to go back, like you were talking about. But that's a choice then, because you know differently.
Mm-hmm.
You have reached a new level of knowledge and understanding about your situation. or you've learned the new skill or whatever to get you to this new point. So you're choosing to go backwards at that point. And um, that can be difficult.
So have you ever had a point in your life, Connie? I'm gonna see if you can make this personal. Have you ever had a point where you personally um had a fear regarding um moving forward in something that you knew that you were called to, something that you knew you were
Yep.
capable of, but you just were stuck?
I knew I was supposed to be a writer from the time I was in high school. And I was so intimidated by what that would mean that I would never show any of my writing to anybody, especially like my novels and stuff like that that I wrote. I never showed that to anybody. I hid it away. I didn't even show my parents, nobody. And I just was like, you know what? No, I'm not going to pursue this. And for many years, like I just took whatever job and that I could, and I ended up finding out what I was skilled at. But I didn't really pursue that until like a few years ago. And even then, it took you challenging me and then me meeting other people who had also been on that path and were on that path at that time that encouraged me to actually be able to go forward. But that fear of actually reaching that level and what that would mean and the vulnerability that would mean and just putting myself out there like that was like it was scary, and I wasn't sure if I was wanting to do that. Like it was scary for me to even show my manuscript to someone when I was in my teenage years, let alone having it open to the entire world to read. No. Like, but it was amazing how through the process of actually writing it, I was like, you know what, it's okay for people to read this about my life and for me to be open and transparent with people that I have no idea of, because I know that my book is bigger than me and it was
Hmm.
worth it. And so that fear held me captive for what, 30 years? It's a long time.
Absolutely. As you were talking, Connie, it reminded me even of a recent thing for me, which in 2021, I founded the No One Stands Alone Foundation.
Mhm.
And for a year or so before that, I really felt a strong prompting in my heart that now was the time to start. And I had held that dream in my heart since I was 15 years old. But there was something that kept holding me back. And I remember, Connie, you would ask me every week, have you sent in the application? Laura, have you sent in the application? And every week I would say, no, I haven't. And you would say, why? And I'm like, I'm not sure. Right. And the bottom line, it was fear. And it
Mm.
wasn't until you and were actually on this webinar with some other authors, and the guest speaker, I don't know if you remember what he said, but he was talking about a major decision he had to make in his life. And he couldn't make the decision. He could not take the steps forward, even though he knew it was the right thing to do. And when he tried to figure out why, he realized it wasn't that he was afraid of failure. It was because he was afraid that it would succeed. And when he
Mm.
said that, it hit me. Like it totally resonated with me. And it was almost like lights went on for me. And I finally could see what was happening because like inside, I knew it wasn't an issue of, oh, my application for this nonprofit would be rejected, but it was that it's going to be approved, which means the moment I send this out, that means this is no longer just a dream. It's no longer something that I just talk about, but I have to actually now do something about it. Right. And so literally that was that day that I actually mailed off the application, Connie, was a huge step for me in a forward progression. Because after
Mhm.
that point, it was like I had stepped into something new. There was no I could no longer go back now. I now had a registered nonprofit foundation that I had to do something with, right? And so now, you and I are on this continuous forward progression with No One Stands Alone Foundation, where our mission and our goal is to help people recognize where they're at, recognize where they want to be, and to overcome those mental health and trauma issues that keep them stuck, right? And so even for myself, that I didn't realize what kind of fear I was dealing with, but I was dealing with fear that was keeping me stuck where I was at, even though what I have to offer, what we have to offer is valuable. It
Mm-hmm.
has great purpose, and I believe those that hear what we put out there are being impacted in a positive way. And
Mm-hmm.
to think if I was still stuck back there in my fear, none of this would be happening. You and I would not even be having this conversation right now.
That's
And
true.
so it's so important that we overcome those fears, that we step past that, and we know that, you know what, I am where I am, but I want to go to the next level. I want to go to that next step, and to have the courage to do it, to take that next step. And for you, whoever's listening, maybe that is to make that phone call. Maybe it is to go back to school, take that next course. Maybe it is to, overcome the fear of relationships because your parents had multiple failed relationships, and pursue, a relationship with somebody that you truly love and care about. Wherever you are in your life, I encourage you, don't stay where you're at, and don't let comparison or fear keep you stuck there, because God has something so much greater for you. He has something so much more beautiful and full of life for you. And every change, every step, every benchmark that you hit, that is now a new solid foundation for you to continually grow, for you to continually progress. And the more you do it, like Connie said, now she feels energized. She has momentum towards doing her second module of her course, right? As you continually make strides forward and growth and progression and healing, then it literally creates this sense of momentum, and spurs you on to the next. And so that's our encouragement for you today. Connie, do you have any last thoughts before we close up for today?
Um, I think the biggest thing to hold on to is that no matter where you're at, there is a place, there is a benchmark ahead of you, whether you recognize it or not at this moment, there is. And I know that sometimes when we're in the daily toil of life, it's hard to see them. It's hard to see those goals that are like so close.
Mm-hmm.
But I challenge you, if you don't have a benchmark in mind, take some time and think about the next step that you want to take to grow in your life, to grow in whatever way you want. If it's to be a better wife, if it's to be a better mother, if it's to be a better um, worker, to be a better friend, to be a better whatever, however you want to grow, what is one step that you can take in that direction? And let that be your new benchmark going forward.
Awesome. Well, on that note, I want to just thank you all for listening, and feel free to subscribe so that you don't miss any future episodes. And if you haven't heard our previous ones, feel free to go check those ones out too. And you can also find us online on our website. I'll put those details in the podcast notes. And we also do monthly webinars the first Thursday of every month. So feel free to also join us online and live. And yeah, we'll see you next time on the NOSA Unleashed podcast. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for tuning in. Join us next time on the NOSA Unleashed podcast.